about the art and science of buildings, primarily the size, the shape, and the structure. But most of all, we're going to talk about the people that make these things. But last and certainly not least, we want to recognize that we know you have a choice with whom you cruise, and we are grateful you chose Chicago Line Cruises today. Thank you very much. Now, I'm just starting this today. For the very first time, I have a quick question. Has anyone read The Devil in the White City? Okay, so fair amount. Well, it occurred to me that that might be the case. So let me tell you something. That book is about two people primarily, this sinister, evil mass murderer, serial killer, but also an architect. His name is Daniel Burnham. Well, Burnham dies in 1912. The buildings we're going to see are all really built after him. But we'll talk about a couple of buildings that are reminiscent from that fair, and we'll also actually talk about a great building. It's by his kids. So anyway, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, I appreciate, thank you for letting me know that. I was curious. It is about a little over 10% of the people on the boat, so it's an interesting thing. Anyway, you might be wondering where we're at. Well, we are afloat on a boat in Ogden Slip. This is named for William Butler Ogden. A slip is an enclosed water parking lot. There's only one way out. And this was for boats that come in and park here, offload goods. On the other side of this warehouse, there were railroad tracks. And so you have bimodal transportation. And that's what really sets up Chicago. But Chicago is located in the southwest corner of Lake Michigan. And the land here is low, flat, swampy, and sandy. Bedrock is 100 feet down. You would not expect that Chicago would ever be the site of one of the busiest harbors in the world in the 1880s. We'll talk about that and the impact that has and why buildings look the way that they do when we see Chicago from the river. Now, in the past, or I should say this, as our friends from Canada would say, First Nations. We recognize First Nations first. We recognize that we're not the first folks here. That in fact, this part of the United States, it's the Council of Three Fires. The Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, and the Ottawa. We recognize that this was their land first. Also, something from the past, 1673. In 1673, this is French land. This is New France. And the French were investigating it. They were coming up the Mississippi River. Their names were Joliet. Got somebody from Joliet here. Joliet and Père Marquette, or Father Marquette. They came up the Mississippi River onto the Illinois. They had to portage their canoes to get on the Chicago River all the way up to their headquarters in Michigan, where they wrote a letter to the governor of New France and said, if you created a canal that would connect the Chicago River with the Illinois River, well, then we'd be able to move goods and people from the upper Great Lakes all the way down the Mississippi. And so you had the prophecy of a canal. And that canal gets pushed from the French to the British to the Americans. In 1830, Chicago begins to sell land in the area to cover the expenses of the creation of that canal. In 1835, William Butler Ogden, the guy for whom the slip is named, comes to Chicago from New York. He's here to make money. He's going to make money off of land sales. By 1837, he's the first mayor of the city of Chicago. He serves a one-year term. About 10 years later, working with his friend and attorney, a guy named Abraham Lincoln, perhaps you know him from being the 16th president of the United States, he creates a company called Chicago Dock and Canal. And with this business, he buys land around Chicago. Here, he buys the piece all the way down to the river, out to the lake, pretty much over to Michigan Avenue, a couple blocks north. In 1861, he goes back to then President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, for permission to create this slip. The slip was originally 2,000 feet long. Today, it's about 1,300 feet. This is an architecture tour. Let's talk about a building. On the right side of the boat, this is the oldest building we'll see too. This is 1905. This is what's called the Chicago Mercantile Building. It's a flexible shape. It's 7 stories tall. An architect once said, buildings are the machines that make the land pay. This 7-story building has an elevator that improves the ability of that building to throw off cash or make money for the developer. The building was actually twice as long as it is today. Skin of building is brick, held up by wood. The building on this sandy, swampy soil is held up from 70-foot long logs pounded into the swampy soil to hold the building up. The tallest building, or the newest building on our tour is the one on the other side of the slip. We're spinning around to see it. It's going to be a 72-story residential tower. Right now, it's about halfway up. It's got another half to go. It's about 36 stories. This building is by an architecture firm called Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill is a local firm. We're going to hear about them a lot in our tour today. The design is by a man named David Childs. If you know New York City and you know the One World Trade Center building, that's by David Childs. Here we're looking at the building on the right side of the boat, and you see the reinforced concrete at the base. Above that are the windows. They're just suspended. They're installed directly onto the concrete. Now, Chicago is known as the skyscraper home. The first skyscraper in Chicago built in 1886 by William LeBaron Cheney. A 10-story tall building, 135 feet high. The Council of Tall Buildings says that any building over 300 meters or roughly 1,000 feet, well, those are called super talls. And in Chicago, we have 5 super talls. And we're going to get up close and personal with the tallest 3. Council of Tall Buildings says there are such things as megatalls, and they're over 600 meters or over 2,000 feet. They're all in China, Shanghai, China, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Jeddah, and Saudi Arabia. The tallest building in the world is located in Dubai. It is Burj Khalifa. It is designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. The architects, Adrian Smith, and the structural engineer, William Baker. In United Arab Emirates. We'll see 2 more buildings by those architects right here in Chicago. We're going underneath the bridge. We're going to go underneath 27 bridges in total. This one doesn't move. It is holding up DuSable Lakeshore Drive. On the right side of the boat, we see an unimproved piece of land. This has become a public park. It'll be finished up in time for 400 North DuSable Lakeshore Drive. This will be called DuSable Park. Now, you might be wondering, he has mentioned the name DuSable twice. Who is this person? DuSable. Well, we recognize Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable as the first non-indigenous resident of the city of Chicago. His father was French, his mother was Haitian. He was a black man. He came to Chicago in about 1780. He created a trading post over near the Michigan Avenue Bridge. Must have known it was going to be a very popular shopping district. Thank you. Anyway, Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable marries an Indian woman. Her name is Kittihawa Catherine. Together they have 2 children, Roxanne and Jean. We recognize Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable as the first non-indigenous resident of the city of Chicago. Another year of history. Bear with me, but these things will all come back as we tell our story. 1848. In April of 1848, the canal is finished. Now you have lumber coming from the great upper states, Michigan and Wisconsin, streaming into Chicago to go out west with the western expansion of the United States. In October of 1848, the first railroad arrives in Chicago, the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. And now you have the ingredients that make Chicago the transportation hub of the United States. Chicago is really a supply chain story, all about the distribution of goods and people throughout the United States. 1852, it's when the railroad comes up from the south, from Mobile, Alabama. It's the Illinois Central Railroad. The Illinois Central Railroad is represented by an attorney. His name is Stephen Douglas. Perhaps you've heard of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Douglas is arguing on behalf of his client. They want to get in on this bimodal transportation. They have railroads out south, and they want trestles in the water that will allow them to bring the railroad up to the south bank of the river. And in exchange, they built these breakwaters. The deal goes through. The Illinois Central Railroad would end up buying all the land you see on the south bank of the river right here, the former Fort Dearborn land. This all becomes private land. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. We're heading into our first mobile bridge, meaning it opens in the middle. We call these bridges Bascule. It's a French term. It means teeter-totter or seesaw. All these bridges have a bridge tender house. little houses where people were in to open and close the river, open and close the bridges when the river traffic was extremely high. This bridge is 1937. It was dedicated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in that year. The engineer who designed this is Joseph Strauss. He came to Chicago in 1905 from Cincinnati. Joseph Strauss. Any Californians on the boat, you'll know this. His other bridge in 1937 was the Golden Gate Bridge. Joseph Strauss. We are on the main stem of the Chicago River. Now, Chicago was not particularly kind to this body of water or the lake. The lake is like the face of the city. The river is like the spine. Chicagoans dumped everything they could possibly dump into the water. And that became a problem in the 1850s all the way to the 1880s. There were regular outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. The city of Chicago fathers were flummoxed on how to keep the water clean. The river was the primary source of drinking water. Eventually, the river gets reversed. Now flows all the way down the Mississippi River. We'll talk about that more later on. In 1956, the United States government passes a law creating the interstate highway system. The government is banking on roads, not rails. As a result, the railroads become increasingly less important. That is a bad thing for Chicago. As a result of that, in 1972, the Illinois Central Railroad gives this riverfront property back to the city of Chicago, which creates an idea. The city says any development along the water must include access 24/7 for all citizens of the Chicago. You can see people walking along the water there. They're on what's called a Riverwalk. We're going to see a lot of Riverwalk today. Back onto the left side of the boat, we see a building that looks like it's up on stilts. Well, first let's look on the far left side. We see a rectangle. This rectangle has horizontal black and silver stripes. This building is by a local guy. His name is Harry Weiss. Harry Weiss grew up in Evanston, goes to MIT and Yale, gets his degrees in architecture, serves in the American Navy during the Second World War, and comes back. He's a very ardent advocate for life on the river and the lake. We'll see more of that. But now let's look at Harry's genius. His client is a hotelier, the Swiss Hotel. And for them, he gives them a triangular shaped building because it doubles the amount of rooms with a river view. And that's the idea of Harry Weiss, always thinking out of the box. We'll see 4 more buildings by Harry Weiss on our tour. Still looking south, we see a city now on stilts, right? Well, here's the reason why. The railroads are really no longer in the transportation business, but they are in the land business. And they own that land all the way down to Hades and all the way to heaven. And what that means is air rights. And so what you're going to see a lot today in the city of Chicago is how we converted these old railroad lines and made them work harder, throw off more cash, if you will, by building on top of them. Here on the left side of the boat, Mayor Daley brings in a local architect. His name is Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Van der Rohe is a famous German architect. He's one of the founders of modernism. He's on the head of the faculty at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he designs this site. It's called Illinois Center. There are 8 buildings. Of the 8 buildings, 5 of them are what we call Miesian, or modernism, or international style. The glass and steel building right to the left. We'll get into Mies more in a little bit. But first, let's go back in time and straight ahead. The Wrigley building. This glazed white terracotta building, for you guys that read that book, this is reminiscent of the Fair of 1893. The architecture firm is Graham Anderson, Probst & White. That's the successor firm to Daniel Burnham. We see a building in 3 parts, a base, a shaft, and a fancy top. That's called tripartite. We see at the very fancy top a building that's based upon a cathedral in Sevilla in Spain called the Giralda Bell Tower. This building is historic revival, Spanish Renaissance. First, on the right side of the boat, here's a building by an English architect. His name is Norman Foster. This is for the Apple Store. Now, Steve Jobs hires Norman Foster, leading designer, to really add value to brand Apple. And by doing that, he thinks he can elevate the perception of the brand in the minds of technical people. We'll see where he got that idea from. He didn't come up with it on his own. Here's the DuSable Michigan Avenue Bridge. And a little bit of shade's gonna feel good right now. Don't forget there's water and pop downstairs for free, so go get yourself some. On the right side of the boat, the Wrigley building. Historic revival, Spanish Renaissance. We see that fancy entrance. What we also see is a change in tonality of the color as it gets tall. Wrigley said, I want a positive building, a building that seems like it's always in the sunshine. Well, they gives him a building with ascending tonality. Another Chicagoan saw this. His name is Walt Disney. Next time you go to Disneyland and you see Cinderella's Castle or Sleeping Beauty, it too has ascending tonality in its design. On the right, the first of our super tall. Here's the Trump Tower, 1,390 feet tall, by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. The architects Adrian Smith and William Baker. This building is 5 years after the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. We see a series of setbacks. Those will come familiar to us when we see all the Art Deco structures in town, but the reason why they're important here is that they line up with their neighbors. The Wrigley building, Marina City, and IBM. A building that physically recognizes where it's located is called contextualism. And contextualism is what we call postmodern, meaning it comes after modernism. So you might wonder, what's modernism? Well, it's on the right. It's 1971, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's second tallest building here for IBM. IBM CEO said good design is good business. This is where Jobs got the idea. Mies van der Rohe said less is more, simplified his design into glass and steel. He's, as a result, the father of modernism, along with Le Corbusier from France and from Frank Lloyd Wright in the United States. What you're looking at here is a building of glass and steel. No matter where you're from, all over the world, in your hometown, you probably have an office building that's a glass and steel box. Some people say familiarity breeds contempt. Well, not everybody loved the glass and steel box. How about his pupil right here? This is Bertrand Goldberg, studied with Mies in Berlin in 1932. He's gone to reinforced concrete away from glass and steel. These two buildings are residential towers, Marina City, 1962, 1963. Raw reinforced concrete, we call them this Corncob. In the back is an office building and down below a marina. The idea here is live, work, and play. Why? Because in the early 60s, Chicago was losing people to the suburbs. And so we wanted to keep them in town. Some people call that building brutalism. Some people call it expressionism. Whatever it is, it's an audacious design. On the left side of the boat, here's another example of raw reinforced concrete. Now you might look at that and you might say, Brian, that's kind of rough. And I'll say, hey, I was in Chicago in 1968. I was at the Democratic Convention. It was rough. Sometimes art imitates life. But how about a palette cleanser? Right alongside of it, 1992, Spanish architect Ricardo Bofill brings back neoclassical elements at the base, and the shaft goes all the way up to the top, where we see that pyramid, reminding us of the Acropolis, the Parthenon in Greece. So the return to neoclassical elements is also an example of postmodernism. Modernism eschewed the past, postmodernism embraces it. Back in time, 1912, 1913, on the right side of the boat. Here's an American design. This is called Prairie School. The emphasis of the horizontal. Even the bricks are far wider than they are tall. The building has this massive spandrel here, and where the piers, the vertical elements rising up, intersect, it's a little bit of design, a little bit of ornamentation. Now that ornamentation we call non-representational. Why? Because American architects before the First World War were all about creating our own unique point of view in American architecture. A unique style for America before the First World War. It would change. All of this is constantly changing. Here, on the right side of the boat, anybody from Iowa, if you're in Iowa, hopefully Iowa State, these two guys are a couple of cyclones. John Picard and William Chilton have their degrees in architecture from Iowa State. They specialize in sustainable technologies in tall buildings. These buildings allow in the optimum amount of sunlight, but they limit the amount of solar gain, which drives down the need for electricity to cool the building. They also draw water from the river, using it to chill their HVAC systems, or heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and then return the water to the river cooler and cleaner than when they borrowed it. On the right, here is a big building. I didn't say tall, I said big. And it's the biggest building in the world when this is finished in 1930. This is the Merchandise Mart. This is by Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White again. This is the biggest building in the world in 1930 all the way to 1944 when the Pentagon is finished. Here we have an example of what we call Art Deco, the horizontal elements. All you Hoosiers in the back, this is your Indiana Bedford Clyde limestone. The building, we see the horizontal elements, we see these chevrons or arrows moving across. We see little diamonds suggestive of metallic material. And here in the center of the building, the tower, are those piers, the vertical elements. They rise unbroken. The Art Deco is all about the energy of life after the First World War. This building was built for a retailer. His name is Marshall Field. It was his wholesale business. The business went broke in '38. Joe Kennedy from Boston buys that building, drives a hard bargain, gets the adjoining lot. Some people say it's Joe Kennedy's ownership of the Merchandise Mart that gets his son, JFK, John Kennedy, as President of the United States. We are now in the confluence of the Chicago River. We have a south branch and we have a north branch. This area was originally called Wolf Point. Here was the original city center. But remember what I said in 1948. We have ships bringing lumber down from Michigan and Wisconsin, and we have grain coming up from the south. Chicago would become the largest distributor of grain in the world, surpassing Odessa in Ukraine in 1860. As a result, it gets heavily dredged, and the city center moves to the Loop, where you all know it is. This land gets developed by the Kennedys in the last 15 years. What you're looking at is a 60-story residential tower, and this in front of us on the right side of the boat, a 60-story commercial building. It's the Salesforce Tower in Chicago. Now it's a development, and as a development, it has a Riverwalk, and a Riverwalk has a little fence on there. You don't want to fall into the river. And what you see on there is a little Circle Y. Well, that Circle Y is where we're at right now. The main stem of the river and the north and south branches. You'll see that logo around town. You'll see it on the marquee of the Chicago Theater in particular. The last building the Kennedys developed was actually the first one. This was 2018. In the distance, you see a railroad bridge standing on its end. I mentioned to you William LeBaron Jenney, the first Chicago architect who built a tall building. His idea was the steel to build a building tilted on its end could build a tall building. And there you have it. Now, on the right side of the boat, we see the Apparel Center by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1977. What I want to point out to you is that opening underneath, that number 5, looks like a big garage door's open. On the left side of the boat, what we're looking at here is this big pink building, and just north of it is where the first railroad came to Chicago in October of 1848. The railroad would eventually cross the river, and it went all the way out to where we were at the slip. But when Joe Kennedy wanted to build that building, he had to pay the Chicago Northwestern Railroad for the air rights over those train tracks to build his building. Kind of makes sense? Kind of, sort of. We're going to see a lot of this. Chicago had more rail footage than anybody else in the world, and a lot of it was developed after that period in 1956 when the government changed policy. We're going underneath a single-leaf Bascule bridge. This is by Strauss in 1905. Single leaf means it goes up on the east side of the bridge, goes up. On the left side of the boat, we're looking at a 34-story reinforced concrete building. It's a residential tower. The architects are Haynes and Papajoy. What we're looking at here, I have to know, on the south face of this building, each unit is a 3-bedroom unit. And so what you're looking at is a balcony and 3 windows. And the architect uses that as a module, and he repeats that over and over, 3 times. We're going to talk about balconies, my little architects, and by the end, we'll have an opinion on them. But first, on the right side of the boat, here's the East Bank Club. This is built in 1980. Today, it's 12,000 exclusive membership dues paying members. This is built in 1980, and it totally changes the north side of Chicago. This was all down and dirty Chicago mercantile buildings, a lot of galleries and nightclubs, and it was a lot of fun. I got my degree in 77, it was a lot of fun. But when it got really legit was when Oprah Winfrey opened up her studios on the west side called Harpo Studios, and she starts hanging out in the East Bank Club. And oh, by the way, there's a skinny basketball player, and he's in there, and he's hanging out at the bar in the East Bank Club. And oh, by the way, his name, President Barack Obama. That's right, 13-year member of the East Bank Club. On the right side of the boat, we see another Chicago mercantile building. This one's old. This one's 1905 to 1906, so we don't see the Prairie School design. You're also young. I am still thinking about the Industrial Revolution and the Steam Age. And you, I'm sure all you're worried about is digital. Well, here's an example of digital disruption. This building was originally built for a printing company. When I worked for Sears, every Sunday we printed 75 million 4-color inserts that went all over the United States. They ain't happening anymore. Now, condominiums. And on the outside, my little architects, balconies. You see, if you're going to be in commercial real estate in Chicago, it isn't nice like this all the time. I mean, the last couple of days it's been hotter than blazes here, and so sometimes you want to be out, sometimes you don't want to be out. But if you've got to go outside, you want to be able to do it. And that's why you see so many balconies in Chicago, or what we call the balconization of Chicago. Drinking stuff is a good idea on this hot day, even if it's peppermint tea and lemon. On the right, a building by a Frenchman. His name is Lucien Lagrange. Remember Mies. Remember the perfectly ordered grid of the building. Here we see something very different. In 2002, he builds this residential tower. But here, it's like everything's been randomized. In fact, we call this design deconstructivism. The balconies are in different places, and on the southwest facade, we see what we call the frank expression of structure. Mies would never do that. It would be much more tidy. Deconstructivism. To the left of that, we see another building. We call that new formalism. Now, that building is by Montgomery Ward, a retailer. And they're building that building in 1970 by a famous American architect. His name is Minoru Yamasaki. Yamasaki has become famous in the 70s because he's just finished the World Trade Center in Manhattan. Montgomery Ward is building a new fancy office building. Why? Well, they've just found out that their arch rival, Sears Roebuck and Company, whose building we'll see downstream, is going to build the tallest building in the world. And so in order to save face and hopefully market share, they take on a new building. Now, again, you're also young. Montgomery Ward. Let me share a story with you. Think Amazon 1.0. Montgomery Ward invents the catalog in 1872. A single piece of paper, 100 items on it, goes out by trail out to rural America, and now they could own the same thing as fancy pants city dwellers. And that business takes off from 1870 all the way up to 1900. He's the largest merchant in the world. But something happens in 1900. Sears shows up, knocks him off his perch. Montgomery Ward's headquarters are on Michigan Avenue. They're still there, Michigan and Madison. He had 3 buildings. He sells all the buildings off. He raises $3.5 billion, and with that money, alters his business model and opens up a chain of 200 department stores around the United States. Montgomery Ward was shrewd. Moves his headquarters right here. The building on the right side of the boat. It's an 8-story structure. It's called the Montgomery Ward Administration Building. Look closely at the design. We see here in the ornamentation the flora and fauna of Art Deco. And up on top we see the energy. Art Deco had this yin and yang thing. Humanity and nature and energy on the other side, because after the First World War, the First War of Machines. So Montgomery Ward wants middle American women to know this. You can shop there, outfit your home, wardrobe your family, and you will remain trend right. You'll also have a good deal. Montgomery Ward would go broke in 2000. Again, an example of digital disruption. There you see the balkanization of Chicago. We just went under another bridge. It's a temporary bridge. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. As we pop through on the right side, this building is the only building on our entire river tour. It's on the river and is on the National Historic List. It's a landmark. It's called the Montgomery Ward Catalog House, built between 1904 and 1906. It's on the list for a number of reasons. One, first reinforced concrete building in Chicago. Two, largest reinforced concrete building in the world, over 1.5 million square feet. Three, it radically changes how Americans consume the catalog business. And four, it's Prairie School. The emphasis of the horizontal, the vertical elements rising up with the non-representational design. The architect Schmidt, Garden, and Martin. Garden is the architect. Martin is the structural engineer. Now, you know about Apple, you know about Amazon rather, and you might have even gone on site and seen Amazon's, how they pick orders, how their robots pick orders. Well, in Amazon 1.0, it's human beings on roller skates. People skated the breadth of this building, picking orders, placing them, boxing them up, and then dropping them into awaiting barges, which would take them down for delivery to the largest post office in the world. We'll see in a little bit. Here we're spinning around. We see a little canal here. Again, it's our old friend William Butler Ogden. He came up here and dug that out for clay. Had a big clay making business. He creates this island. We call it Goose Island in Chicago. As we spin now, looking off the right side of the boat, we see the proper north branch of the Chicago River. And in the distance, you can see a barge loaded with building materials. I call that out because I want y'all to understand, while there's a lot of people out here having a lot of fun on the water, it is still very much a hard-working river. Now, Goose Island and this little piece of property on the right side of the boat are all both owned by a Vancouver company. They're called ONI, O-N-N-I. And they're going to develop this land. But they're waiting for something big to happen. It's part of a series of developments up and down the river called the North Branch Framework. And they're all waiting for something to happen. This land is now open for a variety of reasons, but most of them is digital disruption. As you look out the right side, you'll see the name of the Chicago Tribune. That was the distribution center for the newspaper. 10 years ago, the internet ate a newspaper every week. And there you have it, a victim of digital disruption. We're coming back to our bridge. It's temporary because they're going to replace it. Plans are for a big red suspension bridge. Because, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce all of you to Chicago's casino. This will be the site of Bally's Casino in Chicago. Hopefully, you won't go to Vegas. Here, from right here all the way down, is going to be a 2,000-foot-long Riverwalk. And you can see here, again, on the right side of the boat, it's still very much a hard-working river. A lot of activity out here. One thing I want to tell you about that we cannot see anymore, but it's important for you to kind of have an idea what I'm going to talk about. There was a machine here that had like a big corkscrew, and they would burrow into the ground and they'd take out a cylinder of dirt, and they went all the way down to bedrock, remember, 100 feet deep. And then they put reinforcing rods in there, and then they filled it up with concrete. That's called a caisson. Now, early in the trip, I told you about a 7-story building that was held up by 70-foot-long logs. Well, here, they're going to build a 38-story hotel with over 800 bedrooms. As a result, they need something more than a stick holding it up. In this case, it's a caisson. And those caissons go down to bedrock. All that pre-work has been done. Now, You see the major crane is in place. That came in like last weekend, and now they're getting serious. Now they're working really hard. So, gonna have to come back. We'll go gambling together. We'll figure it out. It'll be fun. I worked for Sears, Roebuck and Company for 10 years. I was their ad agency guy for 10 years too. 20 years on Sears. But I don't have as good a story to tell you about Sears as I can about Montgomery Ward on the left side of the boat. Montgomery Ward is known as the watchdog of the lakefront. And while most Chicagoans don't know it, he is beloved. When Fort Dearborn was determined to be unnecessary anymore in the 1830s, the land was given from the feds to the state to the city. And along the way, the deal was this: forever free and clear, meaning the land east of Michigan Avenue was never to be developed. Well, his offices were on the west bank of curb of Michigan Avenue. When he looked out the window, he had this dog's breakfast of development out his window, and he was upset about it because they had violated the deal. Forever free and clear. Sued him 4 times, wins on his 4th suit, the Illinois Supreme Court, and he becomes, they remediate it. The only thing left is, the thing that grandfathered in is the Art Institute. Everything else is public park. Aaron Montgomery Ward, watchdog of the lakefront. God bless you. Side of the boat. As we came upstream the north branch of the Chicago River, we saw this, and I mentioned about the balcony and 3 windows, balcony and 3 windows. Here's the other side of that building. Not quite so fancy, but it gives us a chance to talk about something else. So we've all learned about caissons. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit. Here, we're going to talk about cantilevers. And what we're looking at is a series of projections of the floor slab to create a balcony or outdoor access for the residents of those units. Now, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo in there, but as we come close here, you'll see every floor in a concrete building is called a slab or a plate. And what they do is they just bump it out a little bit and put a little balustrade on it, a little fence to keep people from falling off. And you can see they just stick off at a 90-degree angle to the vertical. That's called a cantilever. This is the cantilever, 90 degrees to the vertical. We're going to see that in a big way in a little bit. Also, at the end of our tour, if you've seen Jean Gang's Aqua building, the wavy building, you've seen that around town. Her building's 82 stories tall, that's 34. And she has those cantilevers all the way around that building. It's quite the feat. You'll see it when we get there. Let's talk about this though. So this is the townhomes and tower, a development. It has a Riverwalk, but here's the secret. This is private. It's a gated community. Very, very, very rare. Now, if you want to live there, if you want it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo on the water, well, that'll run you about $1.5 million. And if you think you can save a little bread by getting a unit up in the tower, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths will run you $5,000 a month. Now, if you're thinking, why is it so expensive? Well, I'll tell you why. A little bit south of here and a little bit west is another development called Fulton Market. And Fulton Market is where Google has its Midwest headquarters. And there are other businesses there. WPP, which is a British global communications firm, is there. All those folks are highly compensated individuals who are happy to pay the price to live in a semi-private part of the north side of Chicago. Pretty exclusive. Also who lives in here, a lot of sports athletes, pros, who don't want to get hassled by little kids like me when I was little, going to get a autograph from my local ball player in my neighborhood. He was not really happy, all of us kids ringing his doorbell and getting an autograph. Anyway, on the right side, here's Harry Weiss again, and these are single-family dwellings, townhomes, 4 stories and 4 stories, a little gap, place to put your car, and then 5 and 5. Last time one of these turned $2.9 million.
my God.
Very, very rare. Only 4 units. Very exclusive. Here, this little opening, first railroad in Chicago, 1848. Now, this mauve or pink or dusty rose, whatever your Pantone chip says, this building was originally built in 1898 as a cold storage building. Remember, the river's really all about supply chain, cold storage unit. Harry Weiss buys that building in 1983. He guts it and converts it into condominiums. Harry Weiss, ardent advocate for life on the river. Now, we're going back out to the confluence. Beautiful day, great skies, a lot of pictures. In the meantime, I'm going to decipher the west bank of the river and its unbuildable job sites. The first one's right here. This is called River Point. This is our old friends, John Picard and William Chilton. They have help here. Structural engineers are Magnus and Klemisek. Here you see a building up on a platform, 3 stories up. It's because there are 6 lanes of train traffic underneath. Those openings, those rounds, are exhaust fans. And the building where that parabola is, go back to your high school geometry, that parabola is holding up that building where it's kind of out over its skis. It's cantilevered over its footprint. Here's another example of cantilever. On the right, 150 North Riverside. The pale gray element in the middle is 40 feet. Top of the building, 120. That means 40 feet of cantilever on either side of the center line of the building. And as a result, remember Newton and gravity, that building's coming down and it hits this triangle of a truss, and the truss vectors that load into that little skinny slender spine. Amazing. Building's over 50 stories tall. But that's not half of it yet. There's more. So remember, 100 feet to bedrock. Here we see the base of the building. It's still 40 feet wide. Here, under each one of these elements, there are 9 of them, are the 2 largest caissons ever created in Chicago. They are over 10 feet wide. I'm only 5'9" tall. 10 feet wide. I mean, huge. Underneath, on the bedrock, holding that building on the planet. But that's not it. Architects have 3 factors to consider: gravity, lateral forces. It's the Windy City. Up on the top of this building is a room full of water. 400,000 gallons of water. And what that water does is it sloshes, and when the exterior of that building feels pressure, the water moves over to reduce the frequency of the lateral force. Amazing. We're going to talk about this more in a little bit. This building's about 15 years old. These ideas are all pretty fresh. 150 North Riverside. Now, let's go back in time. We're going to talk about another Indiana Bedford limestone building. This is built again in this period between 1928 and 1930. This is a good story. The builder here is a man named Samuel Insull. Insull works with Thomas Edison in wiring London in the 1880s. Makes a lot of money, comes to Chicago. Does it in Chicago with George Westinghouse in 1903. The building here is clad in Indiana Bedford limestone. It's a combination office building and opera house. And the opera is the elite. The elite don't like change. And so what you're looking at here, your imitation, is a combination of both the Art Deco as well as what we call neoclassical elements. Here is where the opera is, and it's a bricked-in wall. They are not celebrating the river. The building itself looks like a big chair. Come with me to the right side. Here's the People's Paper. This is the Chicago Daily News. And they are all in on Art Deco. And what you see here is the first ever use of air rights in Chicago for a public park. The People's Paper. Art Deco. Art Deco is all about this massing or setback. We talked about it at the Trump building. This is by Holabird and Root. This is by Graham Anderson. Graham Anderson and Probst. 2 buildings, both clad in Indiana Bedford limestone, located in the same place, built at the same time, 2 different clients. They look different. One's not right, one's not wrong. Both are great. It's just amazing that they end up in the same place. on the right side of the boat. Trains underneath these buildings. So now the train tracks have expanded to 10 train tracks down here. And this is the Union Pacific Railway. So we've talked about the Illinois Central, we've talked about Chicago Northwestern, Union Pacific. This development's called Gateway. Daley does a deal with New York money, Tishman money. And he says to them, I'll take your money for the development, but you gotta hire Chicago architects. This is done by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Bruce Graham is the lead designer. The structural engineer is a person you all need to know. His name is Fazlur Khan. He comes to the United States from Bangladesh. He gets 2 doctorate degrees in engineering at U of I, and he will change how buildings get tall. This building is 1962, this is 1965. We're still looking at what we call modernism. We see glass and steel. It is changing. The glass itself is now square, it's no longer rectangular with a vertical orientation. We also see a little panel of green below it. That added color was nothing Mies would ever do. He would never go there. But it's changing. 1965, 1962. Now, it also saves Tishman a boatload of money because they built the identical building twice, and that cuts out a lot of cost of development. In the distance here on the right side, we see Chicago's Union Station. When Chicago was the railroad capital of the world, we had 6 massive stations. Remember, no train went all the way across the United States. All the trains ended in Chicago. So if you were a money person and you had to get out to LA to see what was going on with the movie you're funding, and you were the film director, you had to stop in Chicago, get out, go into a hotel overnight, wake up in the morning, get on another train in another station, and go to LA. Whew. It's crazy. This is by Fazlur Khan because this is over the entrance to get on the trains. The perimeter of the building is steel and concrete, minimizing the footprint of the building. Here, these two buildings, this little tiny building with those X trusses, that's like a bug, like an exoskeleton. Those trusses on the exterior. Here's the 5th building. Now this one's different. This is 1983, and this is Jim DeStefano. Underneath, there are now 14 lanes of train tracks. And here you see Amtrak. But the building's no longer a perfect box. It now bends a little bit. It has a movement. Why? Well, you might feel it. The boat's scooped over a little bit east because there's a little bend in the river here. And as a result, Jim DeStefano is mimicking his site. He is aware of his physical context. And as a result of that, we call it postmodernism. Those first 2 boxes weren't doing that. By the time we get to here in 1983, the architect is responding to the location, the specific location of the building. Now, on the right, the world's largest post office. So we talked about this earlier. Now remember, here we are in the middle of the United States. So if you're a retailer and you've got customers on either coast, you want to be in the middle, shipping east and west. And as a result, you have the world's largest post office. Remember, there was no UPS. There were no Amazon electric buses rolling around neighborhoods. Everything was delivered by parcel post. Even RFD, rural free delivery, all the United States postal system. Now the building's 2 buildings. The first, the small one's 1921, the U.S. Mail building, not near big enough, and then they wrap it between 1928 and 1932. Massive structure. 30 years ago, that building goes dark. We change how we handle mail. The building sits for 10 years. Developers are juggling around how to get in on this thing. 20 years ago, they start to redevelop it. It becomes a site with amazing, sustainable amenities. 10 years ago, open for business. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. In the distance, on the left side of the boat, you see a building with a statue on top, a silver statue. That's the Chicago Board of Trade. And that is located on LaSalle Street. It's the end of LaSalle Street. And that street used to be known as Chicago's financial district. Within the last couple of weeks, 3 buildings have applied and received approval to convert the building's purpose from offices to residential. The new buildings we see on the perimeter are draining the downtown offices. Good news and bad news. 39% unoccupancy rate in the inner city is bad news, but it's different. It's change. And so we look out the left side of the boat. Here's another example of a Riverwalk. This one with a naturalist orientation. New architects here. This is Perkins and Will. They do that building and this entire development here. Lead designers and a man named Bruce Johnson. We have scrub oak. We have sumac. We have willows. We have other various things. Last year, this first matured, really colorful. It'll be great. So, you know, around Columbus Day, we usually have pretty good color. Come on back and, you know, look at the flora and the fauna. Now, we just celebrated horrible news, the 5th anniversary of COVID. And COVID had a lot of bad things along with it, but one of them was it really screwed up international investment in real estate properties. And this originally was intended to go quite long, and it's cut off here at 9th Street. And that's an example of just the change. Now, this was all designed 10 years ago. Well, 10 years ago, the downtown business district was blowing and going. Everybody was going to work. 5 years ago, it changed. A lot of change. Here's a little more change. This is 1984. The architect is Bertrand Goldberg. You met him earlier with the Marina City. Reinforced concrete. But look at the staircase. Look at the way it projects off, that wonderful cantilever. Look at the design of these windows. Look at the tension here created by this curve. Tension and then release. This is not Play-Doh. This is raw reinforced concrete. Look at the craftsmanship. Look at the shape of the windows. Some people call this the eyebrow building. And look at it, looks like it has pinstriping. They just allow for a little bit of concrete hanging off there. And when the light hits and casts that shadow, you have a design. Bertrand Goldberg. Now, not everybody loves this design. Not everybody loves the raw reinforced concrete. Our kids were born in a hospital building down at Northwestern that was a Bertrand Goldberg building. And it was torn down in the last 10 years. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's a lot of pressure on his designs, but they are kind of spectacular. The amenity down below, yes, it's still a marina. As we're spinning around here, let's look off the right side of the boat. We're looking in the distance. Remember I said reverse the flow of the Chicago River? Well, now we're looking downstream. This is going down to the Mississippi. On the left side of the river, or the east bank, on the other side of that bridge, that's 12th Street. There's another development there, that's called the 78. Now, one of our local billionaires just announced the other day he's going to build a 20,000 seat football or soccer stadium for us for the Chicago Fire. He owns the club. He's going to build that down there. It's going to be great because we'll see how that activates development up and down the river, just like the casino on the north side. Now, on the left side of the boat, we're looking at an antenna in the distance. See that antenna sticking up? Well, that antenna is located where all Chicago firefighters are trained. That's the Robert J. Quinn Firefighter Academy. And this is where I take my hat off and I say to all of you, my nephew Brendan is a Chicago fireman, and I appreciate all of you who have first responders in your life or serve in active military. You know, they go out the door at the beginning of a shift and you don't know what's going on. So anyway, for all of them, I take my hat off, and for all of you too. Now there's another part of that story. It's the original land that the firefighters built their development station. Perhaps some of you know this. It's on Mrs. O'Leary's farm. Yes. For those of you who don't know, I'll sing you a song. One dark night when we were all in bed, Mrs. O'Leary put a lantern in her shed. Her cow kicked it over. And this is what she said: it'll be a hot time in the old town tonight. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. The Great Fire of Chicago, 1871. Be nice to Captain Joseph and the rest of the crew. We're here all week. The Great Fire of 1871. The winds were howling out of the southwest. It'd been a dry summer, kind of like this one. Chicago was a boom town of pine. The streets were pine, the sidewalks were pine, the buildings were pine. They were capped with tar paper, highly flammable. Chicago, from the October the 9th until the 11th, 32 hours of fire, over 17,000 buildings are destroyed. Chicago's population is roughly 300,000 people. 100,000 people are homeless. And tragically, but kind of amazingly, only 300 people lost their lives. But here's what's crazy. In less than 20 years, so we go from 1870 to 1880 to 1890, the 1890 census, Chicago's population is now over 1 million people. How did that happen? Well, here's how. Number one, the river didn't burn. But also, because of the direction of the wind, this west side of the river was where the largest lumber mill was. You folks from Michigan, this was where Ryerson's lumber yard was. It was an amazing resource. And of course, remember, the glass is always half full. Between 1870 and 1890, steel's invented. Terracotta to make steel unburnable and flammable is invented. Big pieces of glass for offices in the sky are invented. And electricity, electrical motors, elevators are all built. And so Chicago becomes the home of the skyscraper. And what's the most important skyscraper? The one right behind us, the big tall one. It was built in 1974 by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Bruce Graham, and Fazlur Khan. The building is 108 stories, 1,450 feet tall. Today, it's the third tallest building in the United States. It's the 26th tallest building in the world. Fazlur Khan and Bruce Graham worked together on this. It is 9 of Fazlur Khan's truss tubes. 9 tubes rising from the base of the planet. And they are cut at 50 stories, 66 stories, and 90 stories. 2 tubes go all the way to the top of the building. Why is that? Well, they didn't have dynamically tuned dampers. They instead changed the face of the structure so as wind hits it, it's called confuse the wind. And that makes the building stand tall. Now, on the right, we're going to see the Chicago Board of Trade building, a silver statue on top. It's Sears, the Roman goddess of grain. In 1848, Chicago's economy is based upon grain, lumber, and pork bellies. It starts as the Chicago Board of Trade. What we see there is built in 1930 by Halliburton and Root, Art Deco. That building would be the tallest building in Chicago from 1930, all the way to 1965 when the Civic Center is built. Give you an idea of how hard the city was hit by the recession, the Great Depression, and then the loss of the railroads. This building is in the way of the Sears building, or the tower. But this is built in 1971. It was built really quick because the people that were working in this building were actually the vendors for Sears. And what you have here is a building that's just like Mies, vertical elements. But here in 1971, the river is not an amenity. What you see here, now that the river is an amenity, they paint the river on the building. That red box, well, that is where we are currently located. What we're hearing are a lot of motorcycles. It looks like about 1,000 of them just went over the bridge. And on a nice day like this, they make their contribution and their presence felt. On the right side is a white building. This is our last Harry Weiss building. 38 stories and 43 stories. Harry Weiss had a very odd lot. He had to bring the two different shapes together. The tower, 54,000 sprinkler heads in that structure. Just immense. Bridge tender house. On the right, pink granite building. It's actually two 40-story towers, and in between is a 10-story building. This was built for the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The little green building with the X's on it. Chicago Mercantile Exchange starts right at the same time as the Board of Trade. Board of Trade is grain, lumber, pork bellies. The Mercantile Exchange is eggs and butter. In 1972, they shift into foreign financial currencies, and then they move into the S&P 500s, and then they move into a whole range of financial derivatives. They become huge. Open cry trading in the 10-story building between the two 40-story towers. 10-story building. Now, digital disruption. The internet causes open cry trading to go online in 2017. The Merc and the board merge. They move to where the Board of Trade is. Here they remove the stone from the windows, and now this is home to the British Petroleum and to Wells Fargo Bank. Now the river is an amenity, but let's look to the left. This is 1987. This is Helmut Jahn. We see the horizontal stripes again. This one's silver and like an aquamarine. Look at the waterfalls. Some people call this a jukebox or a slot machine. It could be either. But if Helmut Jahn were here and sadly died in a bike accident about 2 years ago, he's really mimicking his neighbor across Canal Street. And right there you see those steps, the massing, the setback. In his design, he converts that into a curve, into a waterfall. But that's his context, is the Daily News building. Now, on the left side of the boat, we see a truss up in the sky. It's on the 1990 building, originally built for Morton Viacol, the rocket engine company. Now it's Boeing, and they've already split. They're in Alexandria, Virginia. The reason why the truss, there are no columns on the west face of that building. There's a railroad track there. And so they used a truss in 1990 to grab that building and pull it back. And pulling that load back to the eastern side of the building, and you see all these columns, the vertical elements, those are all columns that are holding up that building with that truss on top, that cantilever. We see the cantilever we talked about before, 150 Riverside. How about on the right side of the boat? Here's the Bank of America building. This is also by Getchen Partners. So the Riverside building is a Getchen Partner building. So is this. Structural engineers are Tomasetti. Here they have to provide a Riverwalk. So 33 wide Riverwalk, 50 stories tall opening. They just cut it right out of the west part of the building. And then they hold the structure up with sloped steel columns. First time ever used. This whole idea of using columns, but not in the vertical fashion, but in a diagonal or slope. Now, it might make you wonder, Brian, I understand modernism. I kind of get what postmodernism means. What's this stuff? These three buildings, why are they different? And what do we call them? Well, architecture theorists, and there is such a thing, and there are a lot of them, they're writing right now, and they would say the term is meta-modernism. Like Zuckerberg used to change Facebook, the meta-modernism. Why? Digital disruption. These buildings are able to take shapes heretofore never considered because of their ability to calculate the information. And it's new. The hypotenuse on that triangle truss, that steel comes to us from Luxembourg. It's not even made in the United States. But let's go back in time. On the right side of the boat, 1910, 1912, Halliburton and Roche, this is the parents of Halliburton and Roche, they're building the last Chicago Mercantile building on the south branch of the river. Back into the confluence. Riverwalk. On the right side of the boat, we're looking at another example of a riverwalk. Carol Ross Barney, a landscape architect, does these riverwalks from here at Lake Street all the way over to Michigan Avenue, all along the river. and they all have a different theme or a different purpose. This one's called Front Porch Chicago. That's why all the Adirondack chairs are out. Now, we've seen 51 buildings. I've mentioned 51 buildings in the tour so far. Here is our 52nd. And it's at this time you might say, well, Brian, what's your favorite building on the tour? And I would say, this is my favorite building on the tour. This is 1983, the architecture firm from New York, Pedersen, Cone, Fox. I like this building because it's tripartite. It has an entrance that celebrates the pedestrian. We also see that color that's different below the windows. The windows are those horizontal bands of color. This is the oldest ones you've seen of that, so these guys are first. We also see the color is influenced from the river. There's two different shades of color, and the way that it reflects light is like the surface of the water. And that building is on a triangle. And that hypotenuse is where that wonderful curve runs from Lake Street all the way over to here to Franklin Street. And you get that wonderful curve. Could that building be elsewhere on the planet? Sure, maybe. But does it belong here along that wonderful curve in the river? Absolutely. And that's another example of context. Great building. That black box, that's called Art on the Mart. Those projectors shoot images over here to that big building we talked about earlier. That's 2.5 acres. And those projectors light this up every night, Thursdays through Sunday. It happens at 9 o'clock at night. I would recommend you go online and confirm that it's happening. You can also check out the art they're going to show because you might not like the art. But it's pretty cool. And it's dark enough. And by the way, it's really popular. It's free. Double decker bridge. The elevator's on top. That's the brown line. Goes up to the northwest side. On the right, the building in the sunshine. The LaSalle Wacker building. Another example of an Art Deco building. This one is, again, by Halliburton and Roche. I'm sorry, Halliburton and Root. Halliburton's son, John Halliburton, it was Burnham and Root. This is Root's son, John. And here we see the vertical elements. The piers rise unbroken. This building here is capped at 264 feet. Why? It's government rule. It's a law. They still weren't sure that these things were safe. They capped them at 264 feet. So it has this look like a chair. So remember when you saw the Opera House, that too looked like a chair. So the men that did this building, and all of these Art Deco structures, and we've seen 7 of them. We'll see another one in a sec. All built with this Indiana Bedford limestone on the skin. When they were building these, they did not call it Art Deco. They called these buildings modern. They did not go over to their friends at Graham Anderson, Probst and White and say, hey, how's your Art Deco building going? It wasn't called that. Art Deco as a term really isn't even coined until 1959. So these are modern buildings, but they didn't like to use that term that much either. But here's what's wild. The men that did this building are all born in the decade in the 1880s. And so was Mies, and so was Le Corbusier, and so was Walter Gropius, and so was Wilhelm Budak, all of the European modernists, and so same with the Americans. They're all coming of age at the same time. But for those European men coming of age in a post-World War I Europe, it's a radically different experience than what Americans were experiencing, and so as a result, the art is different, the shape is different, the buildings are different. So, American modernism. So you might say to me, okay, what's your favorite American modernism building, Brian? Well, I would say, well, my favorite Art Deco building, in the distance on the right, the gold on top. So that building is Chicago's second favorite building. It's called the Pendry. It's a hotel. And here for you folks that read that book, this is by Daniel's kids. This is Daniel Jr. and Hubert. Daniel Jr. went to Harvard, Hubert went to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and they get a commission in 1927 to build this building for a company from East, a chemical company, Carbide Carbon. They make portable power, and they want a building that shakes it up in Chicago. And so they give them a building that starts off with a base of black granite. Remember, the old man created the White City, a base of black granite, and then this wonderful jade terracotta rising up to 264 feet. You see it there. The block of the building is 264 feet, and then the tower goes up another 128 feet. The building in total is like 500 feet tall. There's a 50-foot spire on top. The top of the building is clad in 24-karat gold. Wow. It's Chicago's second favorite building. And if you have a chance, go into the lobby because it really hasn't been touched. And so it's a really gorgeous example of the Art Deco design. The Board of Trade building is also another example of a building that's still intact of great Art Deco design. Now, behind me, there is a building in the sun, a little bit of an angle. It's a bronze color. It has a column, 4 windows, a column, 4 windows, a column, 4 windows. That building might not look special to you, but let me tell you about the architect. It's the first female architect I have to tell you about on her tour. Her name, Natalie Duploy, comes to Chicago in 1962. She has 4 little boys. She's a single mom. She goes to work for Skidmore. She's been doing great things in the New York office, comes to Chicago, and that's her building. A frank expression of structure. She was not happy following in Lisa's wake. She wanted to do something different. We'll talk a little bit more about her in a second, but first, the DuSable Michigan Avenue Bridge crosses the river, opening up the north side of Chicago in 1920. The first building built is the 1921 Wrigley building. 4 buildings anchor the bridge. On the southwest corner here is the London House, built in 1923. We call this a little Paris on the Prairie, the École des Beaux-Arts from Paris. Art, what we call historic revival, neoclassical. On the east side of the bridge, we have Halbert and Root's first Art Deco tower. And then here we have on the northeast corner, what we're looking at here is a building with the flag on top, and this is the Chicago Tribune. Now the Chicago Tribune is the conservative paper, and they want to go back in the past. They use historic revival, French Gothic. The top of that building influenced by the cathedral at Rouen. Why? Because the publisher had served with the American Expeditionary Force in France in the First World War. He wanted to commemorate that service. It is today a condominium. It's a townhomes. The building is actually by 2 New Yorkers, Hood and Howells, Raymond Hood and William Howells. They're famous for a lot of wonderful Art Deco buildings in New York. In fact, Raymond Hood did Rockefeller Center, and in particular, 30 Rock. Now on the left side, you're looking at a building with peacock on top. 30 Rock looks a lot like 30 Rock. This is actually by our old friend, Adrian Smith, the man who did the Trump building. This is 20 years earlier, 1989, positively giddy with postmodernism. We see the vertical elements going up just like we saw on Halbert and Root. And here, he brings the flying buttresses from the Tribune building over and adds them in, and all the way to the top. Postmodernism was all about this kind of tongue-in-cheek use of ornamentation. Context, context, context. But come with me to the right side. We want to look at Jean Gang's Aqua building. The building with the wavy curves on the exterior. 82 stories tall. 82 of those plates. And they are designed all the way around it. That's what I meant by 360 degrees. Projecting off, cantilevering off the vertical face of the building. Now, tallest building in the world by a female architect, but it's finished in 2007. go on Jean Gang's site, and she will tell you about this design. And she's far more eloquent than me, or I. But what we're looking at here is, she says it reminded her of walks with her father in old limestone quarries. She also describes how the people who live in the building interact with one another with these large pieces. But also, my little architects, these are the best balconies we've seen all day. Sometimes you don't have to really try, you just have to go with the flow. And that's what she's doing here. Now, when that's finished, tallest building in the world by a female architect. Ladies, is there a taller one? Thank you, brown hat. You're absolutely right. Right here, on the right side of the boat, the St. Regis. This is the third of our 3 super talls. We saw the Sears, or rather the Willis. We saw the Trump, and now we see the St. Regis. It's actually 4 buildings. We see an 11-story structure, a 34-story structure, a 74-story structure, and a 101-story structure! 1,200 feet tall. 3rd tallest in Chicago. Art and science. Let's do her art first. How does this shape come from? She takes a pyramid, a 4-sided object, she lops off the top third, she takes another one, puts it on top, she takes that entire thing and pushes it up there. That's where you get this curvy line. She calls it a frustum. She uses tonalities of this azure blue, and where the elements are furthest apart, there is the least amount of color, but where they get close, she loads up that deep intensity. Remember, like the Wrigley building's use of tonality. That's her art. How about her science? These tall, skinny buildings in this windy city, they need help. Magnus and Klemisek is the structural engineer here. And on the 84th floor is a room with 300,000 gallons of water, which again is a dynamically tuned damper. Again, negating those lateral forces. The winds, the sun's in a bad place for this, but between the 89th and 90th floors, those floors are just wide open. It's a very elegant solution, just allowing the air to move through the building. So, Jean Gang, art and science, standing on the shoulders of Natalie Dubois, you be the judge. I know what you had on your list today to see 4 elements of Chicago's marine infrastructure. So let me show them to you. On the right side of the boat, we see a building that would be happy on Cape Cod. Why? Well, it's Cape Cod shingle style. The building's originally built in 1930, the United States Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, about 15 years ago, hands it over to the Chicago Police and Fire Departments. Why? Here's the reason why. Along our lakefront, we have 10 harbors, and those harbors are home to 6,000 recreational craft in the summer months. It gets a little crazy, and as a result, let's just consider this as adults in the room.